This is a book that I wrote, and it's called You Saw Me on the Radio, okay? And the name came from a time that I went to San Antonio for a coach's night, and a lady about my age, I'm 76, came up, and I was younger at the time, and she said, somebody said that you were Dave South. And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. No, you're not. No, I'm Dave South. I don't believe you. And I said, why are you saying I'm not Dave South? And she said, because I had a vision of you in my head that you were short, fat, and bald-headed. And so that's what she saw on the radio. Now then, Leanne and I made the decision when we wrote this book, we worked with the Texas A&M Press, and those people were great to work with, that all of the money that we would make off of it, the royalties, we wanted to send to the Wounded Warriors Project. And we're approaching about $5,000. Let me tell you something, the writer, yeah, those guys are great to work with, but I want to also the press. The writer doesn't make a whole lot of money on this, so we've had to sell a lot of books to get to that figure. Leanne, I was putting it down, writing the stories, and she was editing. We had 6 weeks to do it. And sure enough, somebody told me, the minute you finish and you've turned everything in, you're going to think of about 100 more stories that you could have added in the book. I'm not writing any more books. I'm through writing books. But if you see fit to buy this, I'd appreciate it, and I know the Wounded Warriors would. And I wish I had one to give away, but I don't. Now then, the next thing that happened to me was I announced I was going to retire prior to the 2017 football season. And I was going to retire 17 and 18, which also brought an end to the football and the basketball. And that I was going to continue to do baseball, which is to be honest with you, is my favorite sport. And so we got into the football season, and the network came to me and said, would you mind if we did a bobblehead for you? And I said, well, I think my granddaughter would probably like that. So yeah, I think she'd like to have a bobblehead of Poppy. And I said, but you've got to have a sponsor. And they went, well, we've got a sponsor. I didn't like the way he responded, and I said, who's the sponsor? And he went, AARP. So, okay, yeah, that's fine, I'm an ARPer. So anyway, I gave one to my granddaughter, and I said, she said, Poppy, what is AARP? And I said, All-American Radio Personality. So this is Tiny Dave right here. You know, a couple of things I want to share about Kyle Field, and I'm really not going to talk about sports today as much as I'm going to talk about the things that surrounded us. Now, I was hired at A&M because of my sales ability. The baseball, football, and basketball play-by-play was secondary. They really wanted somebody to sell all of the corporate advertising, so that was my job when I came to A&M. And I went to work doing the A&M games in '85. And then in 1990, they hired me to be their marketing guy, to be their salesman for corporate sponsorships. And so based on that, I'm going to kind of talk about things. But the first thing I want to talk about is 2 instances that came up that we had at Kyle Field. Now, you know when we saw off varsity's horns, okay? If you're in the press box, they started going back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. We got into 1 year there, and I felt like the press box was moving more than it should, because we had bottles of water sitting there, and I could see that water going back and forth like that. It was interesting because you talk to people, the writers down on the 8th level, I was on the 9th level, and sometimes we'd have visitors in our radio booth, and they'd start sawing off varsity's horns, and you'd see those guys down there go like that. We're going to fall. No, we're not going to fall. But I thought it was moving more than it had ever moved before. So I went to our AD at that time, Wally Groff, and I said, Wally, I think the stadium's moving more than it should. And he said, well, I can call those guys in. Every 5 years, they brought in these engineers. They would set up cameras on one side and cameras on the other side, and then they would shoot across both cameras, and that would give them the movement of the stadium. Well, I was relieved when Wally came back, and I even talked to one of the engineers, that he said, it's not moving more than its intolerance. You don't have to worry. I said, okay. I started talking to this engineer, and he said, you know, one thing I guess I should have told Mr. Groff, you might want to pass along to him later on. And I said, what's that? And he said, if everybody in the stands, on the second, especially that top deck, if y'all all move the same direction, He said, y'all could bring the stadium down. I said, really? And I said, well, don't say anything about it because right now they're going like that, and that's the way they continue to do it. But I was relieved to know that the stadium wasn't going to fall and it was intolerance. Then the next thing that happened that I got involved in, and that was that I got a phone call one day, and I don't know who this guy was. He said, you're the only person that I know of in the athletic department, and just because I've heard you on the radio, but he said, my son and I sat in the south end zone, the new end zone we have down there. And he said, at the last home game, and he said, Dave, there's abnormal movement of the stadium. I said, really? And he gave me an architectural term that I'd never heard before. And I said, well, what do you think I should do? And he said, you need to tell somebody because it's abnormal. And I said, okay. Well, the first thing I did when I hung up, called a friend of mine who had been in the College of Architecture at Texas A&M, and I gave him that term. And he said, that's a legitimate term. And he said, I could see how that was happening. Well, it was happening when the PA was playing a song called Sandstorm that year. And the students were bouncing up and down like that on Sandstorm, going up and down and up and down. And he said, that's causing the stadium to move in an abnormal way, Dave, and you need to have somebody look at it. So I sent an email and a phone call, and I covered my tracks on this one. And I told the guy that was in charge of that sort of thing what the man had said, and I said, you really need to have somebody look at this. And he said, and I said, I've also saved this email I've sent to you, and I'm going to have a record of when I called you. So you need to do something about it. It's off my table now. And so he did, but I didn't hear anything else about it. Well, that summer, we were somewhere on vacation, and I got a Houston Chronicle. Brent Zwerneman writes for, I guess he still writes for the Eagle, I'm not sure, maybe not, but San Antonio and Houston. And in one of his stories, he said Texas A&M has had to go back in and reinforce the south end zone because they've got a problem down there. They put in more steel. So I'm glad I said something because talk about a terrible disaster. But that was two things I was involved in that had implications on the football stadium. Okay, my first thing that I had to do when, as far as a major job was concerned, in 1994, we celebrated 100 years of Aggie football. And they put me in charge of that. So the first thing I did was to go back and look at that first season of 1894. And I found out that the Aggies that year, with the head coach being F.D. Perkins, played 2 games. They played one at Texas at Clark Field in Austin, and they got beat 48-0. They played, the next time they played was an unknown date because they can't find it. They played Ball High School. They won that game 14-6. So they were a 1-1 team. And all right, so I keep reading, and I looked for 1895. We didn't play in 1895. What was that all about? So I went over to the library, and I did some research, and I actually found the story. And they said, what happened? By the way, that first team, they had about 20 guys that showed up, and one of them had really played a lot of football, but primarily in high school. But because he had experience, they made him the captain of the team, all right? Well, the next year rolls around, they're getting ready to start the season, and somebody goes, where's the guy that had the football last year? And nobody knows. He's not in school anymore. Does anybody else have a football? And they went, nobody on the team had one, and they couldn't find one on the campus. So they canceled the season. This sounds like an Aggie joke. They canceled the season because they didn't have a football. So we didn't play in 1895. Well, sometime that summer in 1896, they'd got a football by then, one of the guys on the team ran into this fella that had the football who had left school after the 1894 season. And he said, you know, we had to cancel the season last year because you took the football with you. Where'd you go? And he said, I transferred to SMU. Why? Because they had girls up there and A&M didn't. And that's the reason he took the football and he left. So now, On this celebration of the 100 years of Aggie football, we did a whole bunch of things. And for instance, like this right here, we had these souvenir cups we gave to a lot of people. We had Christmas decorations. We gave those to a lot of folks. And we had other things. We had a football that they wanted to do, a football that had the signatures of every Texas A&M All-American. Some of those people had passed away. And that was my project, to try to find the signature of all those people. And like somebody sent me a canceled check that her husband had signed, and he was an All-American. Another family sent me the scholarship paper that their son had signed. And he had passed away. Then I got down to where I just had one more signature to go, and that was John Kimbrough. How many of you have heard the name John Kimbrough? Okay. John lived up in, I think he lived in Haskell, Texas. And I called him, and I'd never talked to him before, even though I go to church with his great-grandson. He's John Kimbrough III. And Mr. Kimbrough came on the phone, and I said, Mr. Kimbrough, we're doing an All-American football to celebrate 100 years of Aggie football, and could you send me your signature, because I'll put it on that ball, and I'll be happy to send you one of the balls when we get them back. And he said, I'll be happy to do that. And I said, I guess you get back down here a lot? He said, I've never been back. And his last year was 1940, I think. He was the national championship quarterback in '39. And I said, you've never been back? Why? Because they fired my coach. You talking about Homer Norton? And he went, yeah. And I said, well, Mr. Kimbrough, he's been gone since 1942. And the people that fired him, they're long gone. I don't care, I'm still mad about it. And I said, Mr. Kimbrough, there are a lot of people that would love to see you. I'd like to meet you. Is there any way we can talk you into coming back? Nope, you're not going to do it. And I said, okay. So John David was our athletic director at that time. And I got up and walked down to his office, and I told him that whole story. And he said, go back and get the phone number and bring it to me. And I said, okay. So I went and got the phone number. And then later in the day, he came to my office, and he said, I'm going to go have lunch with Mr. Kimbrough in Haskell next week, and I'm going to talk him into coming back. And he did. And for the remaining years we were still able to travel, John Kimbrough started coming back for Texas A&M football, and I thought that was such a great thing. Okay, I'm going to get back to my note page here real quick, and I think we've talked about that, and we have talked about that. I have not shown you this, and this came as a surprise because I don't know who did this. I had nothing to do with it. But that's a gold-plated Coca-Cola bottle that's got 100 years of Aggie football on it. And there's a real limited number of these things, okay? That was sent to me through the mail, and to this day, I don't know who sent it. Okay?
Hold it down just a little.
Oh, a little bit?
Okay. She wants to see your face.
Yeah. I don't know why she wants to do that. But anyway, I have started doing this as moved along, and I found situations where I've got things nobody wants. And so I'm going to get that off of Leanne's plate when I go on to heaven, that she's not going to have to worry about getting rid of my stuff. And you'd be surprised at what people will pay for something. And I've been taking it to Aggie musters and Aggie gatherings, all of that memorabilia. One of the things I took recently was a baseball bat that was signed and embossed in gold by the 1999 Texas A&M baseball team. And I took that to Houston County and the Houston County muster over in Crockett. And I also took along a piece of Kyle Field. That was the last AstroTurf that we played on, and I've it bunch of that. And I'm going to give a piece of it away today at the end for anybody that wants to jump up here and say you want it. So it was AstroTurf, the bat, and there was one other thing, might have been another press pass. And they paid $800 for that. And so that went to that club. Then the other thing that I took, and I told Molly about this earlier today when I was talking to her, I took one of these media passes, and this was my life right here. Every time I did a game, I had one of these hanging around my neck. And I've got, boy, boxes of these things. We even have a large frame that's got about 50 or 60 inside of it. But I took a media pass that Billy Gillespie had worn when he was the basketball coach here at Texas A&M, and I gave that, and I don't remember, I think it might have been Houston Club, and I had no idea what they were going to pay for it, but the bidding got up to $750 for that little media pass and his signature. And I've got a ton of those passes that I got coaches to sign down through the year, and I'm going to continue to do that as I go out and speak. I've got two items up here, over here to the left, and I'm going to leave that there if you want to walk up and look at them later on. This is the first set of player cards that we ever did, and that's the 1992 football team. And all of the players on that team are on that card, on that poster, and then that's the uncut, that's a printer's proof sheet, and that's what they sent to me, and I had that framed. That and the 1993 World Series baseball jersey, I've already made a deal with the West Muster coming up in April that I'm taking those up there, and I'm going to let them put it up as an auction item, or they can do silent auction, whatever they want to do with it. But I'm going to continue to do that, and might as well, and then that'll allow them to make some money for the club, and all of that club money normally goes to scholarships, and you send people on to Texas A&M. Okay, next up. I think we're going to go ahead and do this because I want to show you something. Can you put the rings up? Leanne's been doing all of this. Okay, these are championship rings. We don't have a static museum anymore at Texas A&M in athletics. The Letterman had one, but they did away with it, and I don't know what happened to all of the material that was in that museum. I like museums, and I guess most of you here, we all grew up with museums. And so those are my rings, and there's a watch. That plaque in there is the plaque that I got when the National Football Foundation gave me the Broadcaster of the Year award, the Chris Schinkel Award, and then all of the rings. Every team that I worked with, I did football, basketball, and baseball. Every team I worked with that won a championship, and y'all can pass this around, but I'll be over at the door if I don't have it back. This is the only ring that I kept and I wear. It's 1992, and it's the last championship ring that we won in the Big 12. And that's all of the rings that started back in the Southwest Conference and went until we finished in the Big 12. We've not won an SEC championship in my three sports at the time. There's a couple of watches in there. But what I had to do, these were they were in a safe at our house with my son didn't want them. I didn't know anybody, so they were in the safe and nobody could see them. And I went up to the Texas Sports Hall of Fame in Waco. And if you like museums and you like sports, you need to go see that one day, because it's all inclusive. It starts with high school, it goes to college, and it goes to the professional ranks. So any professional team, they've got it's aisle and case after case of memorabilia. And I called the gentleman that runs the Hall of Fame up there. It's right there on University Parks Drive near I-35 on the west side of the Baylor campus. It's easy to find. It's right near the Texas Ranger Museum. And so I called him and I said, I've got these rings. I sent him a picture of it. Right over here are the patches that we wore, those right there. And I wore those patches on our jackets, one of which is the old Southwest Conference Network, which I think says Exxon on it. When I retired, some of you would have listened to the old Southwest Conference Network, sponsored all those years since 1936 by the oil company. And I think there's only about 50 of those patches. And so that's a collector's item, but I'll let them have it. But the Mutual Network, and then we had a year or two when we had just the Southwest Conference Radio Network. This is an ad that was in Texas football that I had saved. And what it is, it's a caricature of all of the Southwest Conference announcers at that time. And so I framed that and gave that to him. But what made it pretty neat for me was I told him, I said, I've got these rings and I'd like for y'all to display it. And he said, it's going to make a lot of the Aggies happy. And that's why you're saying that, because we've got some Texas rings. And he said, how many did you say you had? And I said, I got 23. He said, the guy from Texas only has 10. So he said, all the Aggies are going to be happy about that. But I'm sad that we don't have a museum here. I really am. And we had some great stuff. Now, I do know that some of those items have ended up in Waco, at the Texas Sports Hall of Fame. So there's some of that's on display.
They're displayed individually?
Yes, well, yeah, it is. There's an A&M section up there. There's an SMU section. Everybody, Leanne's been there. Everybody from the Southwest Conference, and they've got, matter of fact, they've got some of the guys that have done play-by-play down through the years, and they've got some of my calls. Frank Fallon is in there. Jack Dale from Texas Tech is there. But they've done a really nice job. And so, anyway, that when you go up there, that'll be available to see. But the other thing, too, that I have not made a deal on yet, but I plan to. This used to hang behind me when we had the old setup at Olson Field. And it was right above my head from my broadcast location. We sat out front, and when they started tearing the stadium down, they came the next day. They were going to start the wrecking ball on it. And they said, anything you want, you better grab now because we're going to trash it if you don't take it. And so I got up there and got a screwdriver, and I took that off the wall. And this hangs in my garage now. But I'll plan someday to give it away and hope that I can do it. One of the things that give you an idea, you've heard about concussion protocol, all these concussions they're having. Dave Elmendorf told me that when he was playing for the Rams, he got hit in the head. He was a defensive back, got hit in the head, and he went to the wrong sideline. He was playing for the Rams, and I don't know who they were playing that day, but he went to the other team's sideline. And he was just standing there, and he didn't know where he was. And finally, somebody from the Rams came across the field and got him and took him to the other side and set him down on the bench. And they got the doctor over there, and he got in Dave's face, and he went, how many fingers am I holding up? Dave said, you could see 2. And he said, 2 fingers. Okay, he's all right, send him back in. And he said, Dave, I know I had a concussion. I know it was a concussion. But that was the way they, 2 fingers. That's how they checked him out that time. No, nothing else was done. And so how many of those players, down through the years had a legitimate concussion and nobody did anything about it? Now then, this is a replica of one of the helmets from 1894. And so can you imagine what concussion protocol was like in those days? One of the young ladies that worked with us, her father made these, and then he sold some of them to WTAW, and they gave those away. And I'm not going to put this on, but this was what a helmet looked like back in those days. So you can only imagine when you get hit in the head with that. One of the things, too, that we did, and I'm going to talk about GRaleigh now. How many of you went to games at GRaleigh White Coliseum? Okay. It was built in 1953, and they tore it down when we started the construction there on that southeast corner. And went to Reed Arena. How many of you knew Billy Pickard? How many of you know that name, Billy Pickard? Okay, Billy. Billy was one of those guys. As a freshman, he sat on the bench for the last game that Aggie basketball played at DeWare Fieldhouse. He sat on the bench for the first game they played at GRaleigh White. He sat on the bench for the last game they played at GRaleigh White. And then he sat on the bench at the first game at Reed Arena. And he kind of felt like that was a badge of honor to have done all of that. But anyway, my first office was at GRaleigh White. And I'm going to tell you something that you talk about, having these nice windows that keep it cool, keep it hot, all that stuff. Well, there were windows in my office on the first floor on the right side that you couldn't close. I mean, they gapped that much. And it wasn't unusual to come in from after lunch and find about 2 or 3 squirrels running around your office, and then they'd run back out when you walked in. We had a raccoon that lived at GRaleigh White for a long time, and he would come out and watch practice every day, sit in the stands like he knew what was going on. But then the other thing that was scary, when they got ready to do some work on GRaleigh White, they climbed up on top. There was a facade, a wall that was about 3 feet high, that went around the top of GRaleigh White, went back to that back, and then it stopped right there. And what they found was that wasn't secured, and some of it was starting to lean. And they got up there and reinforced that, so that thing was falling apart. But now, here's the other thing a lot of you don't know. Do you all know what else GRaleigh White was going to be a multi-purpose facility? You know what for? Anybody? Anybody?
A lot of concerts there.
Yeah. Yeah, matter of fact, Steve Martin did one time, and he walked out on stage and he said, well, it's interesting how you can take a nice auditorium and make it look like a basketball facility. So, but with GRaleigh White, they did it only one time. It was supposed to also be basketball and rodeos. There is a dirt floor underneath the original floor, and they were going to have rodeos. And if you think about it, there was those high rails and all of that up there, places where you could have the chutes. And so they took it out the first time, they had the rodeo, and they liked and never got the floor down again. It wouldn't fit. And I mean, they were taking everything, hammers and what have you, and they made the decision at that time, no more rodeos at GRaleigh White. Now, we put a new floor down, okay? And how many of you know Bucky Turk? Anybody know that name? He had the Mac store, and they allowed Bucky to come in there and cut the original floor at GRaleigh White, cut it up, and he took it. And if you'll go to the computer store at the MSC, he took that floor, and it's over there. You can actually walk on GRaleigh White. But he also allowed some of us to have some pieces of it. And so this is a piece of GRaleigh White. Now I've been cutting some of these up, and I'm going to give a piece away of GRaleigh White today. And I'm not sure where this section came from. But that is tar paper. It's interesting to watch the new guys put the new floor down. That's back-breaking work. I mean, it's really bad. But anyway, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I'll probably cut it up. We'll give that away at Musters sometime so they can make some money on that. One of the other things that I've just bought all kinds of things today. A guy sent this to me. What is this for? Anybody have an idea? You want?
Brand your steaks.
Brand your steak with it. But when you get it hot, be sure and put on a hot pad or one of those deals. You don't want to pick this up right off the fire, but you can brand your steaks with that. I don't know who sent that to me, but I thought it was really nice of him. One of the things that we used to enjoy getting to do was to go to bowl games, especially early on when we first started our career. We would come back to the room at night, and they would have covered our bed with all sorts of gifts. Can't believe what those bowls gave away. We'd go up there for a week. They'd practice, and then other things, they had other activities for the team. But we'd come back, and there would be shirts, there'd be jackets. At one time or another, this is Waterford Crystal, and it's got the Cotton Bowl logo on it. Came back another time, and I've got a vase, a Waterford Crystal vase that they gave us, and I've got baseballs stuck in it, autographed baseballs. But that's some of the things that we've got a reward. And I thought that was really nice. Those bowl people were really great to work with. One other project that I worked on was when I started at A&M, the only truck we had for equipment was one of those little panel trucks, and it would not carry everything. And so eventually we went to San Antonio and got an Aggie down there to give us a little bit larger truck. And then how many of you know Philip Garrett at Garrett Connolly? Okay, Connolly Garrett, isn't it? Yeah, and he called one day and he said, would y'all, if I volunteered to use one of my trucks, one of the semis, would y'all be interested? Oh, I said, would we? Darn right we would. And I said, what do you want for it? And he said, I'd just like to have a dozen season tickets. I think that's doable. And so went and talked, I think John David was there at that time, might have been Wally. But anyway, this is a miniature version of that truck that he did these. And this was a lifesaver for us. They carried all the equipment. They had two drivers, and those drivers, like we played on the coast, like on the East Coast, we had it in UCLA. They would have to leave at least 2 days prior to the game to get there in time to unload the truck. And it was pretty interesting too that as you know, after 9/11, when we started taking this truck, they had to have the bomb dogs go out, and they have to go through everything we took off the truck. They had to sniff, and that really slowed down the unloading of that truck. But anyway, I'll probably give that away to somebody that's got some children someday. Yeah, it is pretty neat little, and it's heavy gauge steel as well. Okay, now then, let's go back to Kyle Field for a moment. They moved the locker room to a different location in the early 80s. And this was one of the stools that they would set the players on. That's a bench they had a stool right in front of their lockers. Then about 5 or 6 years later, they put one on that had a pad on it. And thank you. Here, you hold on to that. And now, if you go to the current locker room, they almost have recliners in there. And so it's gone from this. And so when they started throwing these away, I said, heck, I'll take one of them. So this was number 130 of however many, I have no idea. But that's what they sat on when they first moved to the new locker room, and then they went with the padded chair, and now they have the recliners. And that's pretty neat. Okay, Lee, I think that's just about it. And if we want to start looking at these pictures up here, and then I'll open this up. We're going to finish kind of early today.
I wish we had a museum for this stuff. It's amazing what you've got. Amazing history.
Well, and there's other people out there that have it too. I mean, they've got material that they'd be willing to donate and let people look at it. And it's a lot of that. One of the things up there in Waco is Randy Matson's shot put whenever he broke the world record. And that's up there. Why can't that be here? John David has a bunch of stuff up there. His jersey's up there. And then basketball's got all sorts of things too. But it's just kind of sad.
I was going to A&M when Randy Matson made that shot.
Is that right? Yeah. I meet with Randy and Mark Johnson and Bob Ellis and Ted Nelson and Colin Killian from the city at Rudy's every Thursday morning. We meet over there and have coffee. And there's not a problem in the world that's not solved when we walk out of there, okay? We have everything solved. But Randy told a story one time that I absolutely loved. And Charlie Thomas was his coach. And Randy got a call from Coach Thomas. And he said, have you done something wrong? And he went, not that I'm aware of. He said, General Rudder wants to see us in his office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Are you sure you haven't done anything wrong? And he said, Coach, I don't think I've done anything. I've just been going to school and working out. And so, okay, so they ended up there the next morning at 9 o'clock. And General Rudders looked at Randy and he said, I understand that you're wanting to go to Russia to compete in a track meet. Yes, sir. And he said, but the NCAA is not going to let you go. Why? Well, because it's an AAU event and they don't recognize the AAU. And they say that if I go, they're going to disqualify me from the NCAA. And the general said, okay. Walter Byers was the head of the NCAA at that time. He outside of Kansas City, on the Kansas side, where the office was. And so the general called his secretary in and he said, I want you to call the NCAA office and get Walt Byers on the phone. I want to talk to him right now. Okay. So she went, she came back in, and when she did, she said, Mr. Byers is in a meeting. He will call you back after a while. Go back out there and tell him I want to talk to him right now. So, okay. So she went back out there and she came back in and she said, Mr. Byers is on line 1. And so he got on there and he said, Walt, I got my shot putter in here with me right now. And he's wanting to compete in an event over in Moscow. And you guys are telling him he can't go. Because you'll declare him ineligible because I think he looked at Randy and said, you say AAU? And Randy said, yeah. Hang on a second. Governor, I can't talk right now. I'll call you back after a while. So, I bet my son's in a tizzy right now. What's he talking about? So anyway, he said, let me kill that thing. Thought I had and I apologize. But and so he said, you're going to declare him ineligible because it's an AAU event. And he said, yeah. He said, I want him cleared to go because he's already told me in his conversation he can beat that Russian shot putter. And you know how bad I hate the Russians. And Walt said, okay, let me work on it. He called back within 30 minutes and said, Randy can go. And so that was pretty neat, that he stood by Randy on that deal. But I enjoyed meeting with those guys, and they're all really fantastic people. What? Did he beat him? Yes, he did. Yeah, I think Randy disliked the Russians as much as General Rudder did. These are some souvenirs that I have. This is a Big 12 conference clock. And of course, we're gone from the Big 12, and now we know that OU and Texas will soon be leaving. They're coming to the SEC. So that's a clock that they gave us when we first got into the Big 12 with all the schools on it. And next. All right, this is interesting. I'm a dumpster diver, okay? The original scoreboard, well, I think it was the second scoreboard, when they started to take that down, and we went with that big video board down there at the south end before there were any stands down there or what have you, that light right there, and I can't get that light bulb out, it's stuck in there. That light was on one side, and there was an identical light on the other side of that scoreboard. And what happened is when the Aggies had the ball, that light would go on the Aggie side, and it would turn off when the other team had the ball. And that was in the dumpster. They were throwing that away. So I crawled in there with a friend of mine, and we got both of them out. He took one, and I took one. But that hangs underneath, that's underneath our patio cover out behind the house. It's kind of a conversation piece whenever people come over. Okay, that's one of the original lights from Kyle Field, and Leanne turned it into a flower pot. And so it catches some attention. That's pretty big. I wish we had one of us standing by so you could get an idea about how big it was. But it's been a flower pot for a long time. Very heavy, by the way. Okay, I took this because what happened was I'm a big Brooklyn Dodger fan. I love the Brooklyn Dodgers since I was a little bitty kid. And I went to a memorabilia shop in New York one time. They had a big plaque up there as a picture framed, and they had a picture of Ebbets Field where the Dodgers played, and down below they had a slice of a brick from Ebbets Field, and they had put that on that frame, and you could buy that for $750. I always thought that what they should have done before they totally carried it all off is allowed some students to go in there as a fundraiser and pick up some of those bricks, and if nothing else, just sell a whole brick or slice it up and sell it as a fundraiser. That's part of GRaleigh white. And I had a friend of mine go over and get my piece of it, and that sits out in our backyard, on the barbecue. I got in trouble on this one. The original end zone at Kyle Field was finished in 1929, I think it was. Started in 27 and finished in 29. I think I'm right on that. And that's all that was left of that piece. Each one of the steps, it had a number, and then it had that outline of those white tiles around it. And I couldn't find the one with the number on them. Those were all gone. And so my friend of mine and I went over there, and we were picking up those pieces. And the project chairman, the guy in charge of all of that, he could cuss like my grandfather. And so told us in no uncertain terms to get out of there. And I grabbed that and we left, and he got a piece of it as well. Here's something else that we don't know what happened to this. Do y'all remember on that north end zone that at the very top, before we, did the renovation and all that, at the very top there was a large cement sign up there that said Kyle Field on it. Do y'all remember seeing that? Colton says he does. The guy doing the demolishing of that said he was going to cut it out and would save it for us, okay? As time went by, we all forgot about it. And I got in touch with that guy, and I said, what did you do with that block? And he said, well, I gave it back to y'all. Who'd you give it to? I don't remember, I just gave it to somebody. I thought it would have been so nice to take that block and put it down in the south end zone in front of the stands down there as a part of the original Kyle Field. But we don't know where it is to this day. Have no idea. But that had been a great piece to save. When I first started work at A&M, we had wires that were strung from one pole to the next out on the parking lot on the west side, and that one right there hung where I was supposed to park. And so I had a great parking spot for about the first 3 or 4 years I was there. And then the donors realized that those are good parking places, and I went across the railroad tracks. And so that happened. That 210 and 211 was kind of like that baseball I showed you a minute ago. The baseball hung in between those two numbers, but that was the two sections that I set above in my broadcast location. And that was two more things that I took down, about those two right there in that baseball, that I took down before they demolished the stadium. Okay? This was funny because I was out mowing the yard, And a man pulled up and stopped in front of the house and was standing in front of his car. And so I killed the lawnmower and walked in. Can I help you? I'd never seen him before in my life. Never seen that guy ever. And he pointed at that and he said, can I tell you what I think that is? And I said, yeah, go ahead. He said, that's part of DeWare Fieldhouse, isn't it? I went, yeah. He said, that's what I thought. Got back in the car and left. That's all he wanted to know. And then I got to thinking, I said, I wonder if you're going to come back tonight and try to dig that up and take it, because I want to keep that. DeWare Fieldhouse was where we played basketball originally. On the other side of it, y'all remember on the west side of it, there was a big swimming pool out there. Our weight room at that time was underneath DeWare Fieldhouse for our athletes. It was also a storage place for all of the trophies that we had won down through the years. You know what happened to all those trophies? Dumpster diver. I didn't go get any of them, but then I told some of the athletes that I knew that had won some of those trophies about it, and I think some of them went over there and tried to dig them out, but those were all thrown away. There's just no place to store them. Wow. And so then, but some of those you'd like to have displayed if we had a static museum. Okay, what is this one? Okay, remember that light standard I showed you a minute ago, that's an actual light bulb that came out of one of those lights. You can see how big that thing was. And I've got that in my office now, and I'll probably hang on to that for a while. And okay, when they started tearing down GRaleigh White, a guy called and he had bought, I guess he had put a bid in and said he would go in and take out all of the seats at GRaleigh White. Well, he called me and he said, do you want one of the benches? I need to paint that again. But see the hardware underneath right there? That was actually bolted into the cement. You didn't have a back on those seats. I mean, you just sat up there on that bench. There wasn't a back, and the only thing, you could lean back on somebody's knees, I guess. But that's the original bench that came with that hardware down there. And he gave a lot of us some of the hardware and then those benches, but that's GRaleigh. Is that the last one? That is it. Okay. I think there's one more thing I was going to do. Yeah, I know what it was. Let me move this.
Talk to the Association of Former Students about putting some of your stuff on display?
I don't know where they would do it. I mean, I don't know if they've got the space anywhere.
My daughter's a senior vice president. Would you like to be?
Well, you know, but here's the thing. I don't see myself ever taking those rings back unless they shut down that Hall of Fame, because they had that case made specifically for my rings. There's some stuff I could give them, but I don't know if they'd want it. Some of that, you know, I don't know that it mean anything to anybody. I have more AstroTurf. When they took the AstroTurf out, I went and grabbed, a lot of us did. We went and grabbed a whole bunch of it because they were just going to toss it out. And I think Leanne and I are the only people in Bryan College Station that have horseshoe pits that have AstroTurf in them. And so anyway, so I've cut these out, and I'm going to give this away before I leave today. I don't know, I've got one more thing. Yes, I do. You know, I think a whole lot of my wonderful wife, she's responsible for the PowerPoint over there. And anyway, let me see if I can get over there with this. When this past Valentine's, I know a lot of husbands, like the little truck off. A lot of husbands would go out and get a dozen roses for Valentine's, okay? But I was being what I thought was thoughtful. And so I got her I'll just show it to you. I got her a bouquet of bats. Rather than a dozen roses, there's a dozen bats in there that I've collected down through the years. And she said, I appreciate it very much, but that would really look good in your office. was her response. So anyway, I'll be happy to stand here and answer some more questions because I wasn't sure how long I was supposed to talk. But I don't think I have anything else. Let me look at my notes one more time. Make sure there's not anything else that I want to.
What's your favorite memory?
Favorite memory?
Which sport?
Well, you know what? There's been a lot of different. Now I'll stay away from the sports right now, and I will tell y'all a thing that happened to me. I was walking across campus, and this is a favorite memory of mine. And there was an older gentleman. He was on a cane. And he told me what class year he was, and I figured him to be about 91 or 92 years old. This was in the early 90s. And he was standing in front of the E. King Gill statue.
Where was
It was out in front of Kyle Field at that time. That was the original location. And I walked up, and how you doing? And he said, fine. He said, come here for a second. And I said, what is it, sir? And he went, what is this? Well, I said, that's E. King Gill. I know it's E. King Gill. I went to school with him. And I said, oh, really? That's pretty neat. And he said, what's he doing in a football uniform? Well, he's the 12th man. He never played football at A&M. He was a basketball player. Yes, sir, but he's the 12th man. He said he didn't play football. Yes, sir, I know. Let me try to, I tried to explain the 12th man to him. And he goes, I'm telling you, he only played basketball. What are you guys doing? You know, and I said, and I realized after a little bit, okay, I'm not going to win this argument. And I said, sir, obviously we have made a major mistake here. And I'm going to do everything I can to get this turned around. And he said, thank you. And I turned around and walked off. But I was not going to win that argument. But it was kind of neat to meet a guy who had gone to school with E. King Gill. I'd like to have spent more time and asked him what kind of guy that was.
Did you ever know C.K. Estes?
No, I never met him.
I worked with him.
Oh, did you really? He was the PA announcer for the long time.
Texas accent. He
Yeah.
was the voice of Kyle Field
Yeah.
forever.
The only thing I ever heard is that, we were talking about this earlier today about open and closed mics, is that there would be times that he had a foot pedal that he would step on to talk. That opened up his mic. And there were times that he forgot to take his foot off the pedal, and there would be some salty words that would get out over the PA. But nobody ever challenged him because he had been around. He's been around there for a long time, wasn't he? You know, C.K. Aston's who we're talking about. But I never met him, and I'd like to have met him. Anybody else have any questions you like? Yes, sir.